Thank you for joining us for our Recall Rescue Roundtable. In this episode, we are talking about mock recalls. And, there's a lot of things to talk about with mock recalls. And so far in our series, we've talked about the different kinds of recalls, the different classes, the different agencies. We've talked about the legal side of recalls. Where does the authority come from? What are some consequences? What are some historical elements with the legal landscape and recalls? We've looked at technologies in our last episode involved in recalls. And please take a chance if you're interested to go back and look at those episodes. But this one is extremely different. We're going to be looking at mock recalls. And I think now is a great time to talk about mock recalls, especially when we look at the idea that as a general statement, and I am not the world's foremost expert on mock recalls, but I can tell you this, the worst time to figure out that your plants, your people, and your protocols are not going to help you with a recall is when you're in the middle of a recall. And so I am so excited to have our guests with us. We have Tia Glave and Jill Stuber. They are the co-founders of Catalyst. Welcome, Jill and Tia.
Well, thanks for having us.
Yes.
Jill and Tia and I have an interesting background. We spent more time involving online, connecting and communicating and collaborating, and throughout the pandemic. And then all of a sudden we had an opportunity to meet up in person, and it was like, hey, old friend who I've never actually met in person before.
Okay.
And we've since had opportunities to collaborate together, and I thought it would be great to bring their perspective in. But first off, we need to learn a little bit more about Tia and Jill and about Catalyst. So Tia, we start us off. Tell us just a little bit about yourself and what is Catalyst?
Yes, absolutely. So hello, everyone. I am Tia Glave, and I've been in food safety and quality for about 10, 11 years-ish, a little over a decade. And I've had the opportunity to work with large manufacturing organizations as well as small to medium size and startup and not even started up yet, businesses, food and beverage businesses. And really where my passion lies is around people development and helping organizations develop their strategy. One thing that I learned through the years is that some organizations, as they are trying to build their food safety and quality, it's really disconnected from the rest of their business goals. And that was one thing when I went into consulting a couple of years ago, is that I really wanted to help organizations develop this food safety and quality strategy, but make sure that it's integrated into what they want to get done in their business. How do they want to grow? What avenues do they want to enter into? What new products do they want to bring on? And sometimes if you're listening out there and you are in food safety and quality, then you know that sometimes we're just out of that conversation. And so, that's really where it started, where, I really wanted to help people develop that strategy. And then I've always had a passion for developing the capabilities in others and helping people grow into leaders. And I met Jill, maybe it's been 2.5, 3 years ago, maybe 2.5 years ago. I met Jill, and Jill was on this mission as well of helping people. And I'll have her introduce herself. But when we got together, we really realized that people development and strategy are key to the well-being, to focusing on the well-being of your people and really growing your business. And that was the foundation for Catalyst. Mm-hmm. So I'll have Jill introduce herself and explain even more about Catalyst.
Well, great. Yes. Thanks for having us. I always say I'm a food safety nerd at heart. And really part of that is because I've worked in the food industry for over 20 years. And part of that was, a lot of that was being responsible for programs like recall and traceability. But one thing that I noticed was that we really needed a better way to set up our technical leaders for success, especially in this food safety quality space. And that led me down a path to explore coaching to be a more effective leader. And as I did that, started developing programs. And Tia and I then founded Catalyst so that we could provide crafted, specialized leadership development for technical leaders and really focus on their well-being while having impact for their organizations.
Excellent. And I want to pick up on something that you talked about here too. The idea of personal development, career development, and really preparing for the agility and the strength of a brand. What we're seeing today is we have FDA regulated industries. And there's a blur between pharmaceutical, biomedical, nutraceutical, and food. I'm thinking back also to when you look at the Family Dollar incident last year, was so many items recalled. Literally everything regulated by the FDA was being recalled, and here was a company that had a central distribution center, and now you had 404 stores across 6 states, and you had regulatory compliance, and of course you're also going to have people that are doing that job but have some other title, but you have such a diversity in terms of the challenges with a recall like that. And you have a lot of people that they're going to go from one company to one company, and I'm sure that you have not only experienced but seen people that have gone from this company to this company, more of a lateral, within the same commodity. And then you have people that go from like the petroleum industry to the food industry to the pharmaceutical industry to the some other regulated industry that it seems like the idea of focusing on the professional development and understanding the what is all behind a recall, we can strengthen the individual and thus strengthen the company, the commodity, the entire system.
Yeah, absolutely. Leadership development, and when we think about leadership principles, they are something that can be applied in any industry. And when you really are looking at building that leader, that's really important. Where Catalyst falls in is that we focus specifically on technical leaders. And the reason why we decided to do that is because, like I said, leadership principles, they can apply in many areas, but a lot of times when you go to a leadership course or a workshop that's over a few days, you have to really think about, well, how do I apply that into my role as in food, or in my role as pharmaceutical, or in my role as R&D? What we really focus on is how do you take those leadership principles and really apply it to your role, and really think about, okay, these are the people that I'm working with, these are the type of things that I'm working on, and really start to make a difference in what you are doing. Now, we think that as you move from technical role to technical role, right? Like whether it's pharmaceutical or it's food or anything that's really around, with an asterisk probably, that's in this regulated space, a lot of the technical foundation is about the same, right? Or you learn about the nuances on the job, or doing some studies. But taking that technical leadership with you is key, because you can help. I mean, many of us from food have come from pharmaceuticals and vice versa. And it's because we're taking that technical knowledge and we're taking that technical leadership and applying it in other areas.
So segueing to, let's define a mock recall. I'm assuming, and maybe this for Jill or Tia, this technical leader should not be trained and experienced in the solely in the category of best case scenario where there's no need for recalls.
Oh gosh, no, absolutely not. Because right, just by definition, mock recall is meant to test the effectiveness of your system. And so if you're always doing best case scenario, by definition, you're not testing the entire effectiveness of your traceability and recall process.
Yeah.
So let's pretend I have no idea what a mock recall is. Is it where one day we just kind of come in and say, hey guys, tomorrow we're going to pretend this, and just, tell me how it went. What is a mock recall? Maybe there's a technical leader who is new and is kind of listening in or watching us even, and is like, wait, a mock recall? What's a mock recall?
Mm-hmm. Well, I've seen them done in a couple different formats, but essentially it's like, today we are going to run a mock recall. So whether that's something that people have been informed about, or maybe only some people informed about, it's still coming together and saying, today's the day. We're going to test this process.
Yeah, and you're really looking at the full, like Jill said, the full effectiveness of your traceability programs in your recall program. And so that means that you are basically doing a practice, right? Of someone, if you made ketchup, right? Someone got some ketchup out there and we need to recall it because of consumer complaints or whatever it happens to be. Then you're in, like, what do you do, right? Like, then you're walking through your process. You're finding out, when did you make it, and where did you ship it to, and can you contact those customers, right?
Well,
So
so
it's
that
not in that area, it's where did you get it from and who did you send it to?
so that begs two questions. First, this who should be involved in this? Not just simply like a small group of people in the plant, I'm assuming.
No,
it takes a
no.
team, takes a village when you talk about recall, because as Tia just explained, we're typically reaching out to customers. We're talking with our shipping team, our distribution team, our production teams, our supply teams, our leadership. Like, everybody is typically involved in some way, shape, or form.
Yeah, I mean, you're even thinking about your PR, who's going to put out the message.
Legal support.
Right, exactly. Yep, legal. You're working through all the aspects around a recall that you want to make sure that you have covered. Who's looking at your social media? We know that there's been a few recalls over the last year where companies have put up messages on social media like, hey, it's not us, we don't have any of this issue. And then many weeks down the road, we find out that, yep, you definitely had this bacteria in your area. So even like how you're going to manage social media.
Well,
important.
there's no button on the computer here for me, but we're going to put a virtual pin on social media and come back to that in a little bit. But let's look at that second question. The idea of metrics. What are some basic metrics for a mock recall? Are we looking at how at the end of the quote unquote, we're done with our mock recall and we're going to determine if it was good or bad or effective or not? What are some basic, I mean, there may be other metrics that are very specific to a commodity or a company, but what are some basic metrics that one would look at?
Yeah, I would say the top ones are going to be your percent recovery and your time.
Recovery.
Those are the two big things that you need to know.
Yes.
Time came to mind immediately, but that percent recovery, years ago, probably 20 years ago, I was talking with an audience and we were looking at how on certain FDA web pages, you can look at recall items and it'll say, we're going to recall, I'm making this up, we're going to recall 1 million pounds. And then you look at some past stuff, or 1 million items, 1 million units, whatever. And then you can look at past ones and you find that, wait, so it said they recalled 1 million units, but only 750,000 were recovered. There's a lot of, I would imagine, reasons why you weren't able to recover. I guess the obvious, it was already used, or someone didn't know. But that is this where you're talking about the what you say you want to recall and what was actually recovered, how effective that works?
Yeah, it's in making sure you understood where those 1 million pounds or 1 million units, where they went, so that you can go and get them if you need to. And sometimes, yes, it's recovered. It could be that, are you trying to bring them back or are you trying to destroy them? And you're trying to account for that. But if there's 300,000 units out there, you're not sure where they went at all. Yeah. That will be a major gap.
Well, the FDA has really shifted its focus in terms of the traceability, the use of technology in terms of traceability. One thing that stood out was when the FDA commissioner talked about how, paper-based systems are not cutting it anymore. When the the retail can't tell you where it came from, and the company can't tell you where it went to. But I also think back about probably the most famous earliest recall that people bring up is the Tylenol scare, which here we're at its history. I think it's like the 40th anniversary right about now. And here was something where, immediately they didn't know if it was their fault or if it was the fault somewhere in supply and distribution or the fault at retail. And obviously we know now that it was someone, intentionally, a person intentionally contaminating product. But the responsibility to recall was seen by the company, Tylenol, and I mean the stories about how they used private jets to go to different locations to make sure, and it was something that triggered the idea of, if you look at the idea of root cause analysis, this is where we get safety seals, and let's prevent this from happening again. So is part of a mock recall a debrief that could allow us to uncover, I don't know, whether it's preventative measures or ways to prevent certain things, just lessons learned? Is that a critical part of a mock recall?
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yes. In fact, if you don't have that, then I would even challenge if you've even done a proper mock recall.
I agree.
Because the whole point is that not only do you understand about your key metrics, but part of it, the whole reason you're running it is to see where do we have gaps?
Yeah.
Where do we need to improve? Where are things not lining up? Where are we not finding product? Where are we finding way too much product? Where do we have communication gaps? Where all these different parts, that is why we run the mock recall. Because
Right.
remember,
Yeah.
we want to know, is it effective? And so if we're not taking time to reflect and to really scrutinize that process, then I would even challenge to say we haven't done a proper mock recall.
Yeah, I would say this is even around the line of compliance
Mhm.
versus culture, where, a lot of times if you have, a regulatory body that's looking at you and you have to run a mock recall X amount of times a year, or maybe you even have a customer that wants you to run a mock recall X amount of times a year. You can do that and check the box, and you can say, you know what, let's recall this really easy product, this really easy ingredient, and check the box and say, yes, we've done it. Or you could really build a culture around, we are going to choose a long run, or we're going to choose a difficult product, or we're going to choose a new product that just entered our system and make sure that we could recall it if we need to. That's when you start moving into culture and really trying to focus on how do we make sure that our processes are effective. Yes, we can check the box with any product that we have, right? But how do we make sure that we have an effective system and we are debriefing and we're walking through and we're putting continuous improvement efforts into place and closing gaps? That's really what it's about.
Yeah.
I'm so glad you brought up continuous improvement efforts, continuous improvement plan, the idea of look, we're better than we were before. Okay, but we can still look at how we can see gains. It seems to me like there's this continuous path, this endless loop, if you will. You don't just hire people, you don't just write SOPs, you don't just have instructions for operating equipment, you don't just have a mock recall, you have the debrief, you have the, okay, how is this going to go back and change? Whether it's our training, it could be changing our SOPs, it could be changing our people. Maybe we need to bring some other people on board. Maybe we need to try it again. Now that we learned some lessons, let's try a mock recall again and see if we've improved. And we can change the basic metrics that we looked at. We can say, when we did I'm making this up, when we did the mock recall in February, we found X, Y, and Z. Let's try it again in April. And we want to look for these specific metrics to be changing. And maybe we want to bring in some outside people to do that. But it's going to take a really combined effort of a lot of different stakeholders to pull this off.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, and once again, that's part of that completion loop, because if you've got a corrective action or continuous improvement process in place, part of that is verifying that whatever you said you were going to do actually works. And so I love that you bring that up, because I think what I've seen in the past is that you put things in place and go, yep, this should work, but not intentionally running maybe your next mock recall or running one at like a frequency less than what you're required, right? Like instead of every 6 months, I'm going to run it in 2 months to make sure it's working. And so that's a really critical part as you're managing these programs, to make sure that those parts you're verifying, that you're ensuring it's actually working.
Yeah. I mean, I was a little background on me. I was a nuclear engineer on a submarine back in the 80s during the Cold War. And believe me, we would do tests over and over and over again, because the worst time to make sure, to find out that this doesn't fit, or that this step is missing, or that, this person is not as trained as need to be, is when you're in the middle of it. And, you're talking about the lives of people.
Yeah.
So we had to look at the idea of steps. So let's shift to talking about the steps of a mock recall. Obviously, we're talking in a very generic sense. Different companies are going to have different steps. Different commodities are going to require some different steps. If you have a product with minimal ingredients, here's a 1 or 2 ingredient item versus something with 75 ingredients, or maybe you have multiple production facilities in multiple states, kind of a deal. But let's talk about some basic steps for holding a mock recall.
Yeah. Well, I'd say first it starts with planning. You have to create a scenario with some of those things that you just talked about, these different factors that, whether it's customer related, product related, your business related, so that you can create a scenario to present to your recall team so that they know what to do. Like, is it coming from a customer complaint? Is it a production record? Is it a supplier triggered recall? Like, what is the scenario that's creating this exercise? And that is the first step.
Mm-hmm. And from that scenario, what exactly do you need a recall? Is it that ingredient? Is it the product? Or is it the packaging, right? And that's one thing that is coming up more and more, is that a lot of people don't do mock recalls on packaging. But if it is food contact packaging, you might need to recall that product because of it. So really understanding, to Jill's point, on what is the scenario and what might you need to recall in this scenario.
Mm-hmm.
So let's talk about the scenario, because I just recently read something about a company that they had sesame product in their, it was some type, it was some type of nutraceutical dietary supplement kind of a thing, and somehow it had sesame. And as a lot of us know, as of January 1st of 2023, sesame is an allergen, and you're required to have it on the label. And so they had to deal with the idea of making sure that as of 2023, they didn't have products just with the labeling alone that did not have that properly labeled. I think too, what we want to look at is just the idea of, well, I'll make up a scenario. Okay, well, that could be good, but we could look at other companies, similar commodity companies. I remember when the Peanut Corporation of America issue was going on, and the CEO was saying, I had no idea that there was, problems and recalls with peanuts. It's like, really? You didn't realize that the whole Peter Pan peanut butter thing that happened the year before was going on? So the importance of looking beyond your brand, your company, your commodity, and saying, here's some likely scenarios. But that leads me to my last item, is the idea of ones that we can look at and kind of classify in terms of likelihood and severity. In terms of those scenarios, if we're not looking at that, not just the idea of a recall class 1, 2, and 3, but the idea of likelihood and severity of that being something that impacts your company, your brand, your product, has to be taken in consideration.
Yeah, absolutely.
I think that actually even helps build a case for action, because even in a mock recall event, it's a great opportunity to help others in your organization and even outside understand that potential or something that's going on in the industry. So put that in that case for action and use it not only to test the effectiveness of your system, but also a little bit to get everybody on the same page and a little bit of learning as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And this is a great opportunity for you to do a mock recall outside of your normal annual, or
Mhm.
6 months. Where if something large is happening in the part of the industry that you're in, that is the time to take a look at your programs and say, hey, could this happen here? And if this happened here, could we get our product back if we needed to?
Yeah, because this
So
is
if
a
I,
scenario where good enough isn't good enough.
sure, sure. So
Yes.
we've identified a scenario, and now we just call a recall, or is there more to transitioning from identifying a scenario to conducting a mock recall?
Really you're hitting go. And one of the greatest tips that I got, or that I've heard, even over the last 6 months, someone was saying to have the surprise element.
Mhm.
And I think all of my mock recalls in the past has been planned to some extent, right? Like the quality team knew what was going on. When I'm talking with my supply chain, I'm saying, hey, I'm running the mock recall, can you pull this information? But I love the idea of having an actual surprise element, something
Mhm.
where you present this scenario and you send off communication based off of, maybe it's a phone call or a series of emails, and you're really like, hey, we're in a recall situation, we need to pull this information. Because then you're able to look at how quickly do we respond? How do we prioritize based on something else that's going on, right? And ingredients that are coming in that, oh no, we got held up at the dock door and now we're all trying to, but now we're in recall. What do we do? How do we prioritize? Oh, Jill's out today. She's supposed to be the person to do it. Do we have a backup on site?
Mhm.
Is there someone that can step in? Do they know what to do? Is it
Mm.
written down? So like having that surprise element, and not saying that it has to happen every single time, but making sure that's built into, I think, is like key. Because we're never really prepared for a recall when it happens,
Never.
right? Like someone's on vacation, we came in, we thought today was going to be easy, and so we have our cup of coffee in our hand and we're taking it easy because everything is good, right?
It's
And
never
then,
in the morning. We know that. It's
yes,
always, 1 in the morning, you get a call, or we
yes.
joke about the 4:30 on Friday, but
Hmm.
it's never an ideal time.
It's not. And so making sure that you present the scenario and you hit the go button at a time, it might be 4 o'clock, right? So one of your mocks, you want to make sure that it's at 4 p.m.
If you've got a
Because
24-hour production cycle, and now you got multiple shifts, multiple crews
Mhm.
coming in and
Yeah,
changing over, that kind of a thing.
yeah. Or
Even if
even if
you
you don't,
don't, look
right?
at us,
Yeah,
even if you don't, because if people aren't there, you still will need to recall product if something comes
right,
up.
right.
Mm.
So,
Exactly.
I think it
Exactly.
also tells a lot about an organization's culture if they're willing to do surprise mock recalls, because that shows us like how mature are you in your processes and how you look at being proactive to know where you have gaps.
Well, one
Absolutely.
could argue, though, that there's going to be someone in the chain of somewhere in the C-suite that goes, if we were to do that, that would basically cost us a whole day of production.
Mhm.
Yeah.
What would that technical leader, or what would that anyone in a leadership position appropriate, because I know titles change from different places, but someone who's responsible for this, what would someone say to that person who says, oh, we shouldn't do this because it's gonna cost us production run time, and
I'd
time
say
is money.
great. It helps us test our business continuity program too.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Right. Like that. And I think that is really key. And a piece of having a recall, right, is you should have a recall team.
Mhm.
And when you are
Mm.
presenting this scenario and you're walking through this with the recall team, like you're pulling this recall team together. If you pulling that team together and them doing the steps they need to do to recall a product, ingredient, or packaging, and that causes your business to shut down, then that is 100% a follow-up around
Mhm.
continuity plans. And who's responsible if me as the operation manager needs to lead the floor, right?
Yeah. And it doesn't
Seriously
mean it
true.
has to shift, but your organization needs to understand that risk involved, whether it's for the organization, whether it's for the brand, but most importantly for customers.
Right.
So
Mhm.
continuing to kind of ignore the risk, if you will, continuing to not do this. And there's I one of the things that you both brought up was this idea of, your brand or your corporate maturity, the idea of you're not truly going to be mature as a brand if you are not assuming that there are these likelihoods and severities with risks involved and you're not prepared for it. And one would think that the idea of, yes, it costs time and it costs money to invest in and prioritize into a mock recall. There are unfortunately companies that don't do them. There are companies that do them once a year. There's companies that do them a couple times a year. And one could argue that if we could say, look, we need to do this to make sure that we can avoid a major delay, a major shutdown, a major hit to our brand reputation, something that could be business ending, but worse, something that could literally harm our consumers, harm those that are, needing this product for their health and safety.
Yeah. And that's ultimately what it's about, right? If it takes you if it takes you 4 hours to recall a product versus 24 or 5 days, right? That product being out there where someone can, eat it or ingest it in some way or use it, depending on what the product is, that the risk of someone getting hurt, sick, or even death, right? That it continues to increase, and that time is ticking. And so, it's really our jobs as leaders, as business owners, as someone who is working in an industry that might need to recall a product. It is our job to make sure that if something gets out of our control and something happens where we need to protect consumers and public health, we are able to do so immediately, rapidly.
Yes.
Because otherwise that time, people, babies, elderly, consumers might ingest your product during that time.
And to think about, gosh, what if we knew, but we weren't able to get communication out soon enough and somebody else had this happen to them?
Yes.
Like it's, that I think is something that a team should also consider, because when we talk about the case for action to make sure these systems work well, that right there is a big one. Like if we have it in our power to make sure that this, a horrible scenario doesn't play out, that's our responsibility. And we need to do all our effort to make sure that it's going to not affect one more person.
Well, I think it's obvious that there's different stakeholders involved. You could look at this in terms of part of regulatory compliance for the federal government. You could look at this in terms of meeting the contractual obligation, the demands of a distributor, or your whatever, CVS or Walmart or Walgreens or Costco or whatever, who's going to say, I will only put this product on my shelf if you can guarantee me that you have satisfied in terms of the ability to do a recall kind of scenario. And we could look at it in terms of the idea of, I'm assuming that most patients, consumers, people, the end users would want to assume that a company is able to do this. But there's also all those employees at a company who are involved in this. In a way, the company's being assured that what they're doing is adequate, is going to be sufficient, and that this company is going to be able to survive if there's an incident. Some people are going to look at it purely as, I want to make sure I'm not going to lose my job because we had to have some massive recall. But at the same time, even if you're not worried about losing your job, no one wants to work at a company where, they're not making sure that their protocols, their SOPs, their people are able to do this vital step of a recall, which again has to be a priority. We have to be able to do this. It's not solely about, we made this much money this year. It's also about, we're able to recall if need be, as a top priority.
And if you're focused on culture too, I can't imagine the culture after you go through a major recall, and the way people are feeling, right? And the way, if we're in food, right? So, and a lot of times we eat the food that we make, right? And we eat from the brands that we work at. And if something happens, right, our family could be impacted, or we might know someone that's been impacted, you know, or and even just the man that came from my facility, you know, just thinking through those that people side of things, right, which is all what culture is about, thinking about people, not just the consumers, right, like that's the first thing, but then your own people, to say like, how, you know, how are they going to get up every day and come to work and still be energetic and still carry on capital projects that need to happen and still carry on all these other things when the organization was just involved in a major recall.
You know, there's something we can talk about. We can talk about the money involved in a recall, even a mock recall. We can talk about the technologies and how important those are to help us with the work involved, and even the strength, whether it's speed or quantity, however we want to look at strength. These different metrics we can look at. But there's another element there that I want to add is courage. And you know, we can have all the tools and resources we need. But it is the very human, the very emotional, the very individual element of courage that's needed. And with courage, this might sound a little theoretical, but you know, you either have you're either inspired, which is from inside, or you're motivated. You find motivations, which is external. We want to assume that everyone here is working, when it comes to a recall, a mock recall, or outside of recalls, from an inspired space. That idea of they have their own inspiration inside to make sure that the product is as safe and effective as possible. But sometimes we need those moments of motivation, and I would like to think that a mock recall can be part of that motivation. That idea of, yes, our systems are working the way we want them, we say them, we expect them to work. Or, wow, you know what? I think we could take data from the debrief of this mock recall, and we could do something that would increase this. And our motivation is now to, you know, improve upon this. What are you two, what are both of you, what are your thoughts in terms of that element of a mock recall?
Yeah, I 100% agree with that. And using that as a motivation, you know, a lot of times we do a mock recall and it just stays within that group. It just stays within the quality group, it stays within the recall team, but you really should be talking about what do we do well? What do we need to work on in the next 6 months, in the next year, to make sure that we can close gaps? You know, like when you go through a mock recall and have major gaps, and it's say, like, you know, one of the metrics you can look at is how many suppliers information was correct, right? If you go through a mock recall and you look and say, man, we called, you know, 10 of our suppliers and we only had updated information for half of them, then now you can use that as a motivation to say, you know, we need to look at this more often, or whatever your next steps are. Like, this is a motivator, because if we were in an actual recall, we would not be able to contact our major retailers, our major customers, because we don't even have the updated contact information. And so using those gaps can 100% be a motivator, and you really should use it as a motivator.
Yeah. And hopefully that will help create some inspiration as well, so that people then internalize that and say, you know what, it is like my personal duty to make sure that we are improving and that these recalls work and that we can find product and that things are up to date, because I recognize that every moment and every gap is a big deal. And so I am inspired to do my part, to remove hurdles for others to do their parts, so that we can more collectively work well and have better outcomes when it comes to our mock recalls.
So if we were going to go into a mock recall, would you recommend that don't just go into it saying you want to come out with a hit list? You know, we need to fix this, we need to fix this, this is wrong, this was delayed, whatever. We should expect that we want to come out of this with, we need to celebrate this team's performance, we need to celebrate this person's performance, whatever it is, that it's a moment to recognize and celebrate those successes that we're able to determine. And the only way we're able to determine is either through a mock recall or a real recall. But that's the purpose of a mock recall could be used to find things to celebrate as well.
Yeah, absolutely. You know, if you all know Catalyst, we're all about celebration. We're all about celebration and how to build that into your day to day,
Mm-hmm.
right? And 100% using this opportunity as a moment of celebration, I would say use it. And a lot of times there are a lot of things to celebrate from a mock recall, right? Like we acted with urgency. We had the majority of our suppliers updated. We've been building these relationships, right? So I knew exactly who to call. There are things to celebrate that's a part of that process. I mean, even celebrate the leaders that's on your recall team, right? And the fact that they did drop everything to be able to participate in a mock, like that's big.
Mm-hmm.
Well, it seems almost like Pavlovian, the idea that if we use this as a moment to celebrate, it would be when there's a time for a real need for a real recall, that it's not like something we've tried to avoid, that's a major negative, that it's going to be the end of the world kind of a thing. It's more of a we've done this before, and we've actually come out of this stronger. And if we can come out of it stronger from a mock recall, we can probably come out of it being stronger and celebrate it from a real recall, if that happens to be.
It kind of goes back to when you talked about being on the nuclear sub, you would run drills over and over and over. So that way it made it much easier to just do the process, right?
Oh, and the other thing is, it
And
almost
have
becomes
success.
like
Second nature, right?
I was going to say second nature. It's like, wow, how did I do that? Oh, because I practiced. How did I know all these steps? It's because I've done this before.
Yeah.
I didn't want to have to stop and then read a manual and then, oh wait, there's this stop there. There's this step here.
Yeah, and I think that's a big part of mock recalls, because I would say in general, they're not to the point probably for most that they're second nature. Like we know where to find the information, we understand the steps. Logically, we have all the parts, but even when you get into it, it's still that regrouping. Okay, where are we? Okay, who's doing what part? And so even in that, sometimes as you're running your mock recall, to see like how clear is it? How second nature is it for people to know where they fit, who's making decisions, what the next step is, because all of those things can make a difference.
Right.
And I want to call out again, even those pieces when it comes to like PR, right? Like a lot of times your PR team is not, if everything goes well, they should never have to do this, right? So making sure that it's built into your mock recall brings it front of mind to them so that they do have a little bit of practice. And it's like, you know what? It is time. Let's go. And it's like, yep, I've done this before. We've practiced, whatever those happen to be. But it's like a lot of the people that's on the outside of the team, they might not ever talk about this except for once a year or twice a year when you do your mock recall. So making sure you hone in on that and making sure that they get that good practice and that they're a part of the debrief and that they understand the gaps is key.
Yeah. Well, in social media, I'm going to take out my virtual pen now. Social media, and kind of in wrapping up, I want to bring out that, with social media, we've heard about so many new startups where they weren't following regulatory compliance, and all of a sudden they had to shut down, they had to do a recall, and they had never even thought about doing a recall. And we can look at that sense, but the other element is that with social media, the end users are far much more knowledgeable and aware of these issues that either are tied to or result in a recall, we have to take into consideration the idea of how these are communicated. So, mock recalls, to wrap up here, mock recalls, this is not just something to say we can't avoid this anymore, or this is going to slow down our production, it's going to cost us time or money. If anything, this is going to help us make sure that we're meeting our quality goals, our performance goals, even our various array of metrics in terms of our corporate growth, and meeting or satisfying our stakeholder goals and regulatory compliance. There's so much involved with it. And the only way we can tell is by doing a mock recall. And I'm really glad that we had from the two co-founders from Catalyst here, Jill Stuber and Tia Glave, who really, again, thank you so much for looking at this and really kind of embracing the idea of the technical leader and the very human side of this. We have to have a balance of the human side with the technology. We need the technology to help the people that are going to be doing this work and be leading this work. But at the same time, we can have all the technology in the world. If we don't have strong technical leaders and we don't have the courage behind it, then it's not going to be as effective as we want it to be. And it's that way that we're going to really embrace that investment, if you will, to make sure we're achieving our overall goals. And we can check this through a recall rather than finding out at the last minute when we have no other alternative than to go through a real recall. And the cool thing too is, imagine if a mock recall gives you ways of finding steps so you could prevent, mitigate the needs for an actual recall. Heaven forbid. Anyway, Jill and Tia, thank you very much.
Thank you.
for
It's
having
been
us.
our pleasure. Thank you.
Yes.
For Rescue Roundtable Recall, I'm your host, Darin Detwiler, and look for us with our other episodes, and we look forward to seeing you next time. Thank you very much.